The Honda Civic made a sound like a cough, then a rattle, then nothing at all. Rowan Halstead guided it to the gravel shoulder of Route 11 and turned the key twice. Dead. She sat there for a minute with her hands on the wheel, staring at the check engine light that had been glowing since March. The highway stretched in both directions through flat farm country. Corn stubble and fence posts. No gas station. No houses close enough to walk to before dark. She was 20 years old. She had $62 in her pocket and a duffel bag in the back seat. The car had been her home for the last 3 months. Before that, a shelter in Indianapolis. Before that, another shelter in Fort Wayne. Before that, a group home she'd aged out of when she turned 18 and the state decided she was no longer their problem. 2 years of this. 2 years of sleeping in back seats and eating gas station sandwiches and working cash jobs that paid just enough to keep the tank half full. 2 years of being invisible. She grabbed the duffel bag and the tin box from the glove compartment. The tin was olive green, dented on one corner. Inside was a sewing kit that had belonged to her grandmother, Vera. Needles, thread, a thimble, a measuring tape, and a photograph of Vera tucked inside the lid. It was the only thing Rowan had kept through every shelter, every group home, every back seat she'd slept in. She locked the car out of habit, even though there was nothing left worth stealing, and started walking. The sign said, Fairhaven 2 miles. She'd never heard of it. The September sun was already dropping and the air carried that first hint of fall. The kind that reminded you winter was coming whether you were ready or not. Rowan was not ready. She had $57 left after filling the gas tank that morning. No phone because the prepaid minutes had run out 3 days ago. No plan beyond finding somewhere to sleep that wasn't a car that no longer ran. Fairhaven appeared slowly. A water tower in the distance, then a church steeple, then rooftops. Main Street was 4 blocks long. A diner called Rosie's with a hand-painted sign. A hardware store. A post office. A barber shop with a closed sign in the window. She smelled fried onions from the diner, and her stomach tightened. She'd eaten a gas station sandwich at noon, half of it, saving the rest. At the end of Main Street, the county courthouse had a parking lot full of pickup trucks and folding chairs. A man with a microphone stood on a flatbed trailer holding up a clipboard. Lot 11, he called out. John Deere mower 1982 runs on a good day. Starting at $40, a county surplus auction. Rowan had seen them before. Cities and counties selling off whatever they didn't want anymore. Equipment, vehicles, foreclosed land. She drifted closer, standing at the edge of the crowd, because at least it was something to watch while she figured out her next move. Lots came and went. A tractor sold for $300. A shipping container went for $80. Someone paid $250 for a box truck with a bad transmission. Lot 14, the auctioneer said, and his voice shifted. He smiled at the crowd, the kind of smile that said he already knew this was going to be funny. Half-acre east side of town. Formerly the site of the municipal water tower. Tower collapsed during the storm of 2016. Parcel includes the foundation, all remaining debris, and whatever wildlife's moved in since. He paused. Starting bid, $5. Nobody moved. A few people laughed. Come on, folks. $5. You spend more than that on coffee. Nothing. The auctioneer shrugged and raised his gavel. Going once. Going twice. $5, Rowan said. Every head turned. She felt the stares land on her. A young woman with a duffel bag and dirt on her jeans, buying a lot full of rubble. The auctioneer blinked. We have 5. Do I hear 10? Silence. Sold. He brought the gavel down. Lot 14 to the young lady in the back. See the clerk for paperwork. A man in a seed cap leaned over to his wife. She just bought a pile of junk. His wife shook her head. Poor thing. Rowan didn't care what they thought. She needed somewhere to sleep, and a half-acre of land with her name on it was better than a highway shoulder. The clerk was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain. She took Rowan's $5 bill, had her sign 3 forms, and handed her a folded property deed. Lot 14, the clerk said. East on Maple, past the grain elevator, right on Tower Road. You can't miss it. She paused. Well, you can't miss what's left of it. Rowan walked east. The sun was almost gone now, painting the sky in shades of copper and rust. She passed the grain elevator, turned right, and followed a dirt road for a quarter-mile until she saw it. The lot was exactly what the auctioneer had described. A half-acre of weeds and gravel, surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence, with a gate that hung open on one hinge. In the center, the remains of the water tower lay scattered like the bones of something enormous. Twisted steel beams, concrete rubble. The cylindrical tank itself had split open and lay on its side, half buried in dirt and wild grass. It was a wreck, but the ground was flat. The fence offered some privacy, and there was a patch near the north edge, sheltered by the remains of a concrete wall, where she could set up a tarp. She climbed through the gate and dropped her duffel bag. Then she heard it. A low sound. A whimper. Coming from inside the split tank. Rowan froze. She picked up a length of rebar, holding it like a bat, and walked slowly toward the opening. The last light of the day angled through the gap in the steel, and she saw movement. A dog, thin, ribs showing through dirty fur, curled against the inner wall of the fallen tank. A German shepherd with dark eyes that watched her without blinking. Hey, Rowan said softly. Hey, it's okay. The dog didn't growl, didn't run, just watched. Rowan set down the rebar and pulled the other half of her gas station sandwich from her bag. Turkey and Swiss on stale bread. She unwrapped it and set it on the ground, then backed away. The dog waited a full minute before moving. Then it stood limped forward on a front leg that favored the left side and ate the sandwich in 3 bites. You live here? Rowan asked. The dog looked at her. Its tail moved once. A single cautious wag. Yeah, Rowan said. Me too, I guess. She set up camp that night using a tarp from her duffel bag and 2 chunks of concrete as anchors. The dog, who she'd started calling Duke because he kept circling the perimeter of the lot like he was keeping watch, settled about 10 feet away and watched her work. By the time she lay down on the hard ground with her jacket folded under her head, the stars were out. More stars than she'd ever seen. Growing up in the system, she'd always been in cities. Fluorescent lights in group homes. Street lamps through shelter windows. She'd never seen a sky like this. Duke inched closer during the night. By morning, he was lying against her side. The first 3 days were about survival. Rowan found a public restroom behind the courthouse that was unlocked during business hours. She filled water bottles at the sink. She ate sparingly. Bread and peanut butter from a gas station 2 miles down the highway, stretching her remaining dollars. And she worked. She cleared rubble by hand, dragging steel beams to the fence line, stacking broken concrete in piles, pulling weeds from the foundation. She didn't have a plan beyond making the space livable. But work was something she understood. Vera had taught her that. When everything else falls apart, you use your hands. On the 4th morning, a pickup truck slowed on Tower Road and pulled over. A man climbed out, maybe late 60s with silver hair cut short and hands that looked like they'd spent a lifetime gripping tools. He wore a canvas apron over his clothes and carried a jug of water. "You the one who bought the water tower lot?" he said. It wasn't a question. "That's me," Rowan said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Garrett Pierce. I own the hardware store on Main." He held out the water jug. "Brought you this. You've been out here 4 days with no running water. People notice." Rowan took the jug. "Thank you." Garrett looked around the lot, taking in the piles of sorted rubble, the cleared foundation, the tarp shelter. Duke sat beside Rowan, alert, watching Garrett with calm interest. "You've done all this by hand," Garrett said. "Don't have much else." Garrett studied her for a long moment. "The tower fell 8 years ago. Windstorm. County said it wasn't worth rebuilding because half the town was already on well water by then. Nobody's touched this lot since. Somebody left a dog in it," Rowan said, scratching Duke behind the ear. "Dogs find their way to places that need them," Garrett said. He reached into the truck bed and pulled out a pair of leather work gloves. "Here. Your hands are going to be hamburger if you keep going bare." Rowan hesitated. She'd learned not to take things from people. Everything came with a price, or got taken back, or meant you owed someone. Garrett saw it in her face. "They're just gloves," he said. "I've got a whole store full of them. Come by if you need anything else. I'll run you a tab." "I can't pay a tab right now." "I didn't ask you to pay it right now." Garrett climbed back into his truck. "That tower lot's been sitting empty for 8 years. You're the first person to do anything with it. That counts for something." He drove off, leaving a small cloud of dust on the dirt road. Rowan put on the gloves. They fit. Over the next 2 weeks, she fell into a rhythm. Wake at dawn. Work until the heat peaked. Walk to town for water and whatever food she could afford. Work until dark. Sleep on the ground with Duke pressed against her. The rubble pile shrank. The foundation emerged. It was bigger than she'd expected. A concrete slab about 30 feet across, with a raised rim where the tower's base had been anchored. Steel bolts still jutted from the perimeter, rusted to a dark orange. Garrett came by every few days, sometimes with water, once with a bag of sandwiches from the diner. He never stayed long and never asked personal questions. He'd look at the progress, nod, and leave. Some things are worth more than what they cost, Garrett said one afternoon looking at the cleared lot. $5. Who knew? On the 17th day, a pickup truck pulled up to the gate. Different from Garrett's, older. A man climbed out, maybe early 70s with white hair, under a canvas hat, and a frame that had once been bigger than it was now. He wore a flannel shirt tucked into work pants and carried a toolbox. Lloyd Sawyer, he said. I live about a quarter mile that way. He pointed east toward a small farmhouse visible through the trees. I've been watching you move rubble for 3 weeks. That's a long time to watch. Wanted to see if you'd stick with it, Lloyd said. Most people would have quit by day 3. Rowan stood up and brushed off her jeans. I don't have anywhere else to go. Lloyd nodded as if that was a perfectly reasonable answer. I'm a carpenter, retired. My wife passed 2 years ago and I've been building things in my garage to keep busy. Birdhouses mostly. My daughter says I've made enough birdhouses for every bird in the county. He opened the toolbox. Inside were hammers, a tape measure, a level, and a set of chisels that looked like they'd been cared for over decades. You've got a cleared foundation and no structure, he said. If you want help framing something, I'm available. Rowan studied him. He had steady hands and clear eyes. He didn't fidget or try to sell her on anything. He just stood there offering. Why, she asked. Lloyd looked at the foundation, then at the sky, then back at her. Because I'm 72 years old, and I'm tired of building birdhouses. And because my wife Carol, she would have been out here on day 1 with sandwiches and lumber if she'd been alive. She was that kind of person. I'm slower than she was, but I got here. Rowan felt the corner of her mouth pull upward despite herself. I can't pay you. Didn't ask for pay. I asked if you wanted help. She looked at Duke, who had walked over to Lloyd and was sniffing his boots. The dog sat down beside him. Something Duke hadn't done with anyone except Rowan and Garrett. Okay, Rowan said. Show me how to frame a wall. Lloyd smiled for the first time. It changed his whole face. Get me 2 sawhorses and a straight piece of lumber, and I'll show you everything I know. They started that afternoon. Lloyd brought more tools from his garage and a stack of scrap lumber he'd been hoarding. He showed Rowan how to measure twice cut once and swear only when the nail bent. He showed her how to check a corner with a framing square and how to plumb a post with a level. He was patient in the way of someone who had taught these things before and didn't mind teaching them again. By the end of the first day together, they had the skeleton of a wall section lying flat on the foundation. It wasn't much, but it was a start. That's solid work, Lloyd said, stepping back to look at it. I had a good teacher. My grandmother Vera taught me how to fix things around the house. Plumbing, drywall, wiring. Smart woman. She was. Rowan ran her hand along the top plate of the wall frame. She raised me after my mom died. Worked 2 cleaning jobs so we could keep the apartment. I used to help her fix things in the building because the landlord wouldn't. She paused. She died when I was 14. Lloyd was quiet for a moment. Carol died 2 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Fast. He picked up a nail that had fallen and put it in his pocket. The house feels wrong without her in it. Too quiet. Building things helps. They didn't say anything else about it. They didn't need to. That evening, after Lloyd had gone home, Rowan sat in her tarp shelter with Duke at her side. The September night had cooled. She could see her breath. She pulled Vera's sewing kit from her duffel bag and opened it. The photograph of Vera looked back at her. Silver hair, kind eyes, hands that had mended 1,000 things. Rowan closed the tin and held it against her chest. The next morning, Duke started digging. He'd been doing this all morning, scratching at one particular spot near the center of the foundation where 2 large concrete sections met. Rowan had told him to stop twice, but he kept coming back to it. Now he was digging hard, his front paws throwing dirt and gravel behind him, whining low in his throat. Duke. Hey, what are you doing? She walked over and crouched beside him. The concrete here was different. She ran her gloved hand along the surface and felt it. A seam. Not a crack from the collapse, but a deliberate line where 2 sections of concrete had been poured separately, with a thin gap between them, sealed with something dark. Tar, maybe. Or caulk. She knocked on the surface with her knuckle. The section on the right sounded solid. The section on the left sounded hollow. Rowan sat back on her heels. Her pulse picked up. She'd been around enough construction to know what a foundation was supposed to look like. Poured concrete, rebar, anchor bolts. Simple. But a sealed panel in the center of a foundation, that wasn't standard. Someone had built this on purpose. She borrowed a pry bar from Garrett's store the next morning and came back to the spot. Duke sat beside her watching, his ears forward. She worked the flat end of the bar into the seam and pushed. The old sealant cracked and crumbled. She pushed harder and the concrete panel shifted. Just an inch, but enough to confirm what she'd suspected. There was a space underneath. Rowan worked for 2 hours, prying the panel loose piece by piece. The concrete was thick, maybe 4 inches. Heavy enough that she had to lever each section aside with the bar and her full body weight. Duke paced in circles, whimpering. When the opening was finally wide enough, she looked down. A chamber, maybe 6 feet deep, 4 feet across, lined with poured concrete walls that were dry and clean. Not a crack, not a leak. Whoever built this had known what they were doing. and at the bottom, resting on the dry concrete floor, was a wooden box wrapped in dark oilcloth. Rowan stared at it. Her heart was hammering. The September wind blew across the open lot, rattling a loose piece of steel somewhere behind her. Duke leaned forward, nose pointed straight down into the chamber, and let out a single bark. Something had been buried here, buried carefully, deliberately, by someone who wanted it found, or someone who wanted it hidden. Rowan lowered herself into the chamber. The chamber smelled like damp earth and something older, mineral, stone that hadn't seen air in decades. Rowan's boots hit the concrete floor, and she crouched, her eyes adjusting to the dim light that filtered down through the opening above. The box was about the size of a milk crate, oilcloth wrapped tight around it, secured with twine that had gone brittle with age. She lifted it carefully, surprised by its weight, and climbed back out into the daylight. Duke pressed his nose against the box immediately, sniffing every inch of it. "Easy," Rowan said. "Let me see what we've got." She sat cross-legged on the concrete slab and cut the twine with her pocket knife. The oilcloth fell away, revealing a wooden box with dovetailed corners and a hinged lid. No lock. The wood was dark walnut, smooth and carefully finished. Someone had taken time building this. She lifted the lid. Inside, packed tightly and organized with care, were 4 items. A leather-bound journal, its cover worn soft and dark. A stack of photographs wrapped in wax paper. A bundle of papers tied with a faded blue ribbon. And a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges, with handwriting across the front. Rowan picked up the envelope first. The handwriting was neat and deliberate, the kind that came from a generation that had learned penmanship in school. It read, "To whoever carries the Halstead name forward." Her hand went still. Halstead, her name, her mother's name, her grandmother Vera's name. She set the envelope down and picked up the journal. The leather was cracked along the spine. When she opened it, the pages were stiff but intact. The first entry was dated April 12, 1957. Started work on the municipal water system today. The council voted 6-1 to approve the project. Mayor Davis shook my hand and said the town's been waiting 20 years for clean water. I told them we'd have it running by fall. My name is Elliot Halstead, and I am the new water commissioner of Fairhaven. Rowan read the words twice. Elliot Halstead, water commissioner. The man who built the tower she was sitting on. She turned pages carefully. Elliot wrote about pipe layouts and pump capacities, about digging trenches in July heat, about the satisfaction of watching water flow through a system he'd designed with his own hands. He wrote about his wife Linda, who brought him lunch at the work site every day. He wrote about their daughter. Linda's doing better. The doctors say the pregnancy is going well. We're hoping for a girl. I already know what I'll teach her. How to read blueprints, how to measure twice, how to build things that last. Rowan turned more pages. The entries track the construction of the water system through 1957 and into 1958. The tower rising beam by beam, the pipes being laid, the pumps being installed. Then, in a 1962 entry, Elliot wrote, "Claire turned one today. She's walking now, gets into everything. Linda says she has my stubbornness. I hope she has Linda's kindness, too." Rowan stopped reading. She stared at the name on the page until her vision blurred. Claire. Her mother's name was Claire. Claire Halstead, who died in a car accident when Rowan was 4. Claire, who Rowan barely remembered except for the smell of her shampoo and the sound of her voice singing in the kitchen. She unwrapped the photographs with shaking hands. The first showed a young man in work clothes standing in front of a steel framework grinning. He was tall, lean, with dark hair and a jaw that Rowan recognized because she saw it every morning in whatever mirror was available. Behind him rose the skeleton of the water tower, half-built, beams reaching into a clear sky. Elliot Halstead, her grandfather. The next photographs were family pictures. Elliot and a woman with kind eyes and light hair standing on a porch. Elliot holding a baby wrapped in a white blanket. A little girl, maybe 5 or 6, sitting on a tractor with Elliot beside her, both of them laughing. The little girl had dark hair and a gap-toothed smile that looked exactly like the one photograph Rowan had of her mother as a child. The one Vera had kept on the dresser. Rowan laid the photographs on the concrete beside her and tried to breathe. Her throat was so tight, it hurt. She had a grandfather. He had lived here. He had built here. He had built the tower she was sitting on, and he had sealed a box of his life into its foundation before he left. She didn't open the sealed letter. Not yet. She needed to understand the rest first. She spent the next 3 hours reading Elliot's journal from beginning to end. Juke lay beside her, head on her knee, while the September sun tracked across the sky and the shadows lengthened. The first years were good. Elliot finished the water system in 1958, a year ahead of schedule. The town threw a celebration. Clean water for every home in Fairhaven. Elliot was proud of the work and the journal showed it. He wrote about maintenance schedules and pump upgrades, about training a part-time assistant, about the pleasure of a system that worked the way it was supposed to. Then, around 1959, the tone changed. A man named Theodore Brennan had moved to the area and started buying farmland east of town. Brennan wanted to develop the land, build houses, attract new residents. But he needed water rights. The town's municipal supply, the one Elliot had built, was the only reliable source. Brennan approached the town council with a proposal. He'd invest in expanding the water system if the town granted him development rights to the water supply. Elliot opposed it. He wrote about it in plain, angry language. Brennan doesn't want to improve the system. He wants to own it. Once he controls the water, he controls who builds where, who pays what, who gets served and who doesn't. I told the council this at the meeting. Half of them listened. The other half were looking at the check Brennan was waving around. The entries grew darker. Brennan started a campaign against Elliot. Rumors that Elliot had mismanaged public funds. Questions about receipts and invoices that had always been in order. A letter to the county newspaper suggesting an audit. The audit found nothing wrong. Every dollar was accounted for, but the damage was done. 3 council members who had supported Elliot changed their votes. In March of 1961, the council voted 4-3 to replace Elliot as water commissioner. They didn't fire me for cause. They eliminated the position, created a new one with a different title, and gave it to a man Brennan had recommended. Same job, different name, different person. Legal, technically. But everyone knew what happened. Rowan could feel his anger in the handwriting. The letters pressed harder into the page, the lines less even. The next entries were written over several days in quick succession. Elliot sealed the chamber. He described the process, mixing the concrete, pouring the walls, waterproofing the interior, placing the box inside, sealing the panel, and covering it with rubble so it looked like part of the foundation. If they take everything else, they can't take what's buried in the thing I built with my own hands. Those were the last words Elliot wrote in Fairhaven. The next entry was dated 2 weeks later. From a motel in Missouri, we left, Linda, Claire, and me. I loaded what I could into the truck, and we drove south. Linda's sick. She won't say how bad, but I can see it. Claire's just a baby, too young to know we're running. I told Linda we'd come back someday. I don't know if that's true. Rowan closed the journal. The sun was nearly gone. She sat in the fading light on the foundation her grandfather had built, holding the book that held his life, and the tears came without warning. Silent, steady tears that she let fall because there was nobody to hide them from except Duke. And Duke didn't judge. She had spent her entire life believing she came from nothing, that she'd been passed along and left behind because nobody wanted her. Vera had been the exception, but Vera had died. And after that, Rowan had assumed the pattern was permanent. People left. That's what they did. But Elliot hadn't left because he wanted to. He'd been driven out. The next morning, Rowan walked into town carrying the journal and the photographs. She went straight to the hardware store. Garrett was stacking boxes of nails when she walked in. He took one look at her face and set down the box. What happened? Rowan placed the journal and the photographs on the counter. I found something under the foundation, a sealed chamber with a box inside. She opened the journal to the first page. Elliot Halstead. He was the water commissioner. He built the tower. Garrett leaned forward, reading the entry. His expression shifted from curiosity to something quieter. Recognition. Elliot Halstead. Garrett said slowly, "My uncle worked under him. Said he was the best thing that ever happened to this town's water supply." He looked up at Rowan. Then there was some kind of trouble and he left. She showed him the photograph of young Claire sitting on the tractor. "That's my mother, Claire Halstead. She died when I was 4. I was raised by my grandmother, Vera Halstead. She paused. Vera never talked about Fairhaven, never mentioned Elliot or the tower or any of this. I didn't know any of it existed until Duke dug up the foundation. Garrett sat down on the stool behind the counter and was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Come with me." He led Rowan to the back room of the store where a filing cabinet stood against the wall. Garrett pulled out a drawer and riffled through old papers until he found a folder marked Town Records Miscellaneous. Inside were photocopied pages from the county archive, meeting minutes from the 1950s and 60s, property transfers, commission appointments. Garrett spread them on the workbench. There, he pointed to a page dated August 1955. Elliot Halstead appointed water commissioner by unanimous vote of the Fairhaven Town Council. He flipped through more pages. And here, March 1961. Motion to restructure the Water Commission sponsored by council members Pruitt, Dawson, and Brennan. Brennan Rowan said. Theodore Brennan. He sat on the council for 2 years. His grandson is Marcus Brennan. Runs the biggest development company in the county now. Garrett's voice was flat. The Brennans have had their hands in this town for 3 generations. Rowan picked up the 1961 minutes and read them. The language was dry and bureaucratic, but the meaning was clear. Elliot Halstead had been replaced. His position had been dissolved and recreated under Brennan's influence. The man who built the town's water system had been erased from it. My grandfather didn't mismanage anything, Rowan said. The audit cleared him. It's all in the journal. I believe you, Garrett said. My uncle always said something wasn't right about how Elliot left. He said Elliot was honest to a fault. He looked at Rowan with steady eyes. You planning to stay? Rowan looked at the minutes. At the photograph of Elliot standing in front of the half-built tower. At the journal that held his words and his anger and his unfinished story. Yes, she said. I am. Rowan spent the rest of that day reading the journal cover to cover. In Garrett's back room while he ran the store and brought her coffee without being asked. The later entries were shorter, written from motels and rented rooms as Elliot moved his family south. Linda got sicker. Claire grew from a baby into a toddler. Elliot worked odd jobs, plumbing and pipe fitting. The skills that had built Fairhaven's water system now earning him just enough to keep his family fed. The journal ended abruptly in 1963. The last entry was 3 lines long. Linda's treatment is expensive. Claire needs new shoes. The bonds are safe. Someday I'll go back for them. Bonds. Rowan flipped back through the pages searching. There it was, in a 1960 entry. Elliot had been buying U.S. savings bonds with portions of his salary since 1956. Small amounts, $50 or $100 at a time. He'd stored them in the box before sealing the chamber. Rowan thought about the bundle of papers tied with the blue ribbon. She hadn't examined them yet. She thanked Garrett and walked back to the lot. The papers were still in the box where she'd left them covered with the tarp. She untied the ribbon and spread them on the concrete. Savings bonds. Series E. Dated between 1956 and 1962. 16 bonds in total, ranging from $50 to $500 in face value. Rowan didn't know exactly what matured savings bonds were worth, but she knew they grew over time. These were more than 60 years old. She was still sitting there counting bonds when she heard the crunch of tires on the dirt road. A black SUV, clean and expensive, pulled through the open gate and stopped 20 feet from where she sat. The engine idled for a moment, then cut off. A man stepped out, late 40s, gray at the temples, wearing a blue dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He had the build of someone who'd played football in college and kept enough of it to still look imposing. He looked around the lot, taking in the cleared rubble, the organized piles, the tarp shelter. Rowan sitting on the foundation with papers spread around her. "You the one who bought this parcel at the surplus auction," he said. Same flat declarative that Garrett had used, but without the warmth. "I am. Marcus Brennan. Brennan Development." He pulled a business card from his shirt pocket and held it out. Rowan didn't take it. He set it on the nearest pile of concrete. This property was slated for condemnation. The auction should never have included it. "I've been in contact with the county assessor's office, and I'll be filing a formal challenge to the sale." Duke stood up from where he'd been resting and moved to Rowan's side. His ears were flat. A low rumble started in his chest. "The sale was legal," Rowan said. "I signed the paperwork with the county clerk. Paperwork can be reviewed." Marcus's voice was calm, practiced. "I'm not trying to make trouble for you, but this parcel is part of a development plan that's been in progress for 2 years. The county was supposed to hold it for commercial rezoning, not dump it in a surplus auction for $5. But they did," Rowan said. "And I bought it." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, then at Duke, who hadn't stopped growling. "You should think about what you're doing here. A half-acre of rubble with no utilities. No water hookup, no septic. You can't build on this. You can't live on this. I'm already living on it." Something flickered across his face. Surprise or maybe irritation at being told something he hadn't expected to hear. "I'll be in touch," Marcus said. He turned back to the SUV, opened the door, and paused. "For what it's worth, I'd advise you to cooperate. These things go easier when both sides are reasonable." He drove away. The dust from his tires drifted across the lot and settled. Rowan looked down at the savings bonds spread around her, then at Elliot's journal, then at the photograph of her grandfather, standing in front of the tower he'd built with his own hands. A Brennan had driven Elliot Halstead out of this town 60 years ago. Now another Brennan was standing on the same ground telling his granddaughter to leave. Rowan gathered the bonds, the journal, and the photographs. She carried them to her tarp shelter and wrapped them carefully in the oilcloth. "We're not going anywhere," she said to Duke. Duke pressed his head against her leg and stayed. The letter from Brennan's lawyer arrived 3 days later. Garrett brought it to the lot, holding it between two fingers. "Certified mail," Garrett said. "Came to my store because you don't have a mailbox. I signed for it." Rowan opened it, standing in the morning sun. Duke sitting at her feet. The language was dense and formal, but the message was simple. Brennan Development was formally challenging the auction sale of Lot 14 on grounds that the parcel had been improperly listed. A hearing would be scheduled with the County Board of Supervisors. In the meantime, the letter advised Rowan to refrain from any construction or modification of the property. "Can they do this?" Rowan asked. "They can file whatever they want," Garrett said. "Doesn't mean they'll win. Come on, let's go talk to someone who actually knows the law around here." They drove to the county clerk's office in Garrett's truck. The same woman who had sold Rowan the lot, Mrs. Delano, was behind the counter. "I remember you," Mrs. Delano said, peering over her reading glasses. "Lot 14, the water tower." Garrett explained the situation. Mrs. Delano pulled the file and spread it on the counter, running her finger down each page. The listing was proper, she said. The parcel was declared surplus by the county assessor 18 months ago. It went through the standard 90-day review period. No objections were filed during that window. She tapped the signature line. "This sale is clean, so Brennan's challenge has no basis," Garrett said. "I didn't say that. He can still argue to the board that the assessor made an error, or that the parcel should have been held for rezoning. The board can review it. But as of today, this sale is legally valid, and Miss Halstead is the property owner." Rowan let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said. Mrs. Delano looked at her with an expression that was hard to read. "For what it's worth, I grew up in this town. I remember when that tower was standing. My father always said the man who built it was the most honest person he'd ever met." She closed the file. Good luck. Back at the lot, Rowan sat on the foundation with the bonds spread in front of her. 16 bonds. She'd counted them 3 times. She needed to know what they were worth, but she was afraid of the answer. Afraid it would be nothing. That 60 years of waiting had produced a stack of expired paper. And afraid in a different way that it would be something real. She was still sitting there when Lloyd's voice called from the fence line. "You've been at this a while." She looked up. Lloyd stood at the gate, toolbox in hand. "Thought I'd check on you. Garrett said someone came by yesterday making noise about the sale." Rowan stood and walked over. "Marcus Brennan. Says the lot shouldn't have been auctioned. He's filing a challenge." Lloyd set down the toolbox. "The Brennans always have to own everything they see." He looked at the bonds scattered on the foundation. "What are those?" "Savings bonds. My grandfather hid them in the chamber before he left. I need to know what they're worth, but I don't know where to take them." Lloyd thought for a moment. "First National Bank on Main. Ask for Mrs. Porter. She's been there 40 years. If anyone can tell you, it's her." Rowan gathered the bonds and walked into town alone. She didn't ask Garrett or Lloyd to come with her. This was something she needed to do herself. The bank was a brick building with tall windows and a marble floor that echoed when she walked across it. She wore the cleanest clothes she had, jeans without visible holes, a flannel shirt she'd washed in the courthouse restroom sink. She walked up to the counter and asked to see someone about savings bonds. The teller was a young man who looked at the bonds, looked at Rowan, and excused himself to get his manager. The manager was an older woman named Mrs. Porter. She brought Rowan to her office and spread the bonds on her desk one by one. "These are Series E bonds," Mrs. Porter said, adjusting her glasses. "Issued between 1956 and 1962. They've all reached final maturity." She pulled up a calculator and began entering numbers, checking each bond's face value against a maturity table. "You understand these have been earning interest for over 60 years. Rowan's hands were clasped tight in her lap. "How much are they worth?" Mrs. Porter finished her calculations and set down her pen. She looked at Rowan with an expression that Rowan would remember for a long time. "The combined matured value of these 16 bonds is $52,341. The number didn't register at first. It sounded like a sentence in a foreign language. Rowan heard the words, but they didn't connect to anything real. "I'm sorry," she said. "How much?" $52,341. Rowan sat very still. Her vision narrowed to a point, then expanded, then narrowed again. She gripped the arms of the chair. "Are you all right?" Mrs. Porter asked. "Yes," Rowan said, though her voice came out as a whisper. "I'm fine. I just need a minute." Mrs. Porter gave her the minute. She gave her 5. When Rowan could breathe again, they discussed the process for redeeming the bonds. It would take about 2 weeks. Some paperwork to verify Rowan's identity and her connection to Elliot Halstead as his descendant. The property deed and the journal would help establish the chain. Rowan walked out of the bank into the October sunlight. She got into Garrett's truck, which he'd loaned her for the errand, and sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes without starting the engine. Then she cried. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel and sobbed. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep. The kind that empties you out and leaves you lighter. She had never in her life had more than $400 at one time. She had eaten gas station sandwiches and slept in her car, and worked double shifts at restaurants that paid her under the table. She had gone to bed hungry more times than she could count. $52,000. Her grandfather had saved it, bond by bond, dollar by dollar, from a water commissioner's salary in a small town in the 1950s. And he had sealed it in the foundation of the thing he was proudest of, hoping that someday the right person would find it. When she got back to the lot, Lloyd was already there measuring lumber. She told him about the bonds. He set down his tape measure and was quiet for a long time. "Well," he said, finally, "that changes a few things." "It does. You could leave, you know. 52,000 and a piece of property. Cash out. Sell the lot. Start fresh somewhere with real walls and running water." Rowan looked at the foundation, at the half-built wall frame, at Duke, who was lying in a patch of sun watching them. Elliot didn't save that money so someone could leave, she said. He saved it so someone could stay. Lloyd nodded slowly. Then let's build something worth staying for. That evening, after Lloyd had gone home, Rowan sat in her tarp shelter with Elliot's journal open on her lap. She turned to the entries she hadn't finished reading. The ones from Missouri. Elliot wrote about Linda's declining health, treatments that cost more than he could earn. Claire growing up, first steps, first words. Elliot taking jobs beneath his skill level because nobody in Missouri needed a water commissioner. In 1970, the entries became sparse. Linda was in the hospital more than she was out of it. Elliot sold the truck to pay medical bills. Then, in a 1970 entry that took up a full page, Elliot wrote, "Linda died this morning. I held her hand until the end. She made me promise I'd take care of Claire. I don't know how to do this alone. Claire is 8 years old. She doesn't understand why we can't go home. I don't know how to explain that home doesn't exist anymore." The entry continued. "I don't know if leaving Fairhaven was the right choice. I've asked myself that question 1,000 times. Could I have stayed and fought? Brennan. Could I have gone to the state, filed a complaint, hired a lawyer? Maybe. But Linda was sick, and the town had turned on me, and I was scared. I made the choice I thought would keep my family safe. I don't know if it was the right one. I just know it was the only one I could see." Rowan closed the journal and stared at the sky. Elliot's words sat in her chest, heavy and familiar. She knew that feeling. The feeling of making the best choice available and still wondering if it was wrong. She opened the journal again, but this time she started from the back. She'd assumed the rest of the journal was blank. She'd been wrong. 40 pages from the back, starting from the rear cover. And working forward, there were more entries. Different ink. Shakier handwriting. The pen had pressed harder into the paper, and the letters were uneven. Written by hands that had aged decades since the front of the journal. The first of these back section entries was dated November 4th, 1997. "I haven't written in this journal in 34 years. Linda is gone. She passed on March 9th, 1970. Cancer. I held her hand until the end and promised her I'd take care of Claire. I tried. God knows I tried, but I failed her too." Rowan turned the page. Claire left home when she was 17. It was 1979. Same stubbornness Linda had. Same fire. She packed a bag one night and was gone by morning. Left a note that said she'd call when she was ready. She never called. I spent years looking. Hired a private investigator with money I didn't have. He found traces. A job in Indianapolis. An apartment in Columbus. A name on a lease in Dayton. But by the time he'd track her to one city, she'd already moved to the next. She didn't want to be found. The entry continued. "I stopped looking in the early 80s. I was getting old, living in a rented room in Springfield, Missouri, working as a maintenance man at a school. I'd lost my wife, my daughter, my town, my career. The only thing I still owned was a piece of land in a place I couldn't go back to, and a box buried under a tower I'd built for people who didn't want me anymore. Rowan read this entry 3 times. The loneliness in it was so plain, so undressed that it hurt to look at directly. The next entries were spaced years apart. Elliot wrote about turning 70, then 75. He wrote about health problems, a heart condition that required medication he could barely afford, a knee that needed replacing, the slow inventory of a body wearing out. Then, in an entry dated June 2nd, 2001, the handwriting changed again. Urgent. Messy. A woman from the state of Ohio called me today, a social worker named Mrs. Kessler. She said my daughter Claire died in a car accident on January 19th of this year. She was 39 years old. Rowan stopped breathing. Mrs. Kessler said Claire had a daughter, a little girl named Rowan. She's 4 years old. Claire had listed me as next of kin on a form she filled out at the hospital when Rowan was born. That's how they found me. The first time anyone's found me in decades. The handwriting blurred. Rowan wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and kept reading. I asked Mrs. Kessler if I could take Rowan. She said there would be an evaluation. I'm 83. I have a heart condition. I live in a 1-room apartment. I don't have a car. I told her I'd do whatever it took. She said she'd be in touch. The next entry was 2 weeks later. The state denied my petition. They said I'm too old, too sick, too unstable to care for a child. They said Rowan would be placed in the foster system, where she'd receive proper care from qualified guardians. I told them I am her grandfather. They said that wasn't enough. Rowan set the journal down. She pressed her palms flat against the floor and concentrated on the feeling of solid wood under her hands, because the rest of the world had gone sideways. Elliot had tried to find her. He had known about her. He had asked for her and been told no. She'd spent 16 years in the system, believing nobody had ever come looking, that she'd been passed along because there was nobody at the other end of the chain who wanted her. And the whole time an 83-year-old man in Missouri had been fighting to bring her home. Juke pushed his head under her arm, and she held onto him while she steadied herself. Then she picked up the journal again. The entries after the denial were short. Elliot wrote about calling Mrs. Kessler every month, asking for updates on Rowan. She gave him very little. Rowan was in a group home. Rowan was doing well in school. Rowan had been moved to a different facility. He wrote about sending things, a blanket he'd knitted, a photograph of Claire as a baby, a letter addressed to Rowan. He didn't know if any of them were delivered. Most of them probably weren't. Then in his last entry, dated September 12, 2005, Elliot wrote something that made Rowan's chest crack open. I'm going back to Fairhaven. I know the tower is probably gone or falling apart. I know the town doesn't remember me. But the box is still there. I sealed it to last 100 years. Inside that box is everything I have left to give. I've written a letter. I'm putting it in the box with the bonds and the photographs. Whoever finds it, whether it's Rowan or someone else who carries the Halstead name, they'll know what happened. They'll know I tried." The entry continued. "I'm leaving tomorrow morning. It's a 9-hour drive. My heart isn't good, but I've got enough medication to get there and back. I just need to open the foundation, add the letter, and seal it again. If I can do that, then at least something of me survives in the place where I did my best work. I built that tower to give water to a town that needed it. I'm going back to make sure it still gives something to whoever comes next." That was the last thing Elliot Halstead ever wrote. Rowan sat in the glow of the kerosene lamp for a long time, the journal in her lap. She didn't move, didn't speak. Juke lay with his head on her knee, his eyes half closed. She needed to know what happened. Elliot had written that he was driving to Fairhaven. The box had been sealed, which meant he'd made it. He'd opened the foundation, added the letter, and resealed the chamber. The sealed letter, the one addressed to whoever carries the Halstead name forward. She hadn't opened it yet. She'd been saving it, waiting until she understood enough of the story to read it properly. She reached into the oilcloth bundle and pulled out the envelope. Her hands were steadier than she expected. She broke the seal and unfolded 2 pages of the same shaky handwriting. "To whoever carries the Halstead name forward. If you're reading this, you found your way here. You found the tower, or what's left of it. You found the chamber I built into the foundation when I was 37 years old, and still believed I could outsmart the people who wanted to take what I'd built. My name is Elliot Halstead. I was the water commissioner of Fairhaven from 1955 to 1961. I built this tower with my own hands. Hired a crew of 4 men and poured every foundation, welded every beam, and tested every valve myself. It was the best thing I ever did for this town. The second best thing I ever did was raise my daughter Claire in it. I lost both. The tower was taken from me by politics and greed. Claire was taken from me by my own choices and the bad luck that follows people who make one wrong decision at the wrong time. I don't know who you are. Maybe you're Rowan, my granddaughter. Mrs. Kessler told me about you. 4 years old when I found out you existed. The state said I was too old to care for you. Maybe they were right. But I want you to know I tried. I drove to the courthouse in Jefferson City twice. I wrote 6 letters to the foster care board. I called every week for a year. They never let me see you. If you're not Rowan, that's okay too. Whoever you are, you found this place. You cared enough to look. That's enough. The bonds are yours. The land is yours. The photographs and the journal are yours. I built this tower to give water to a town that needed it. I built this chamber to give a future to whoever comes next. If you're reading this, you found your way home. Build something. Stay. Elliot Halstead. September 2005. Rowan folded the letter and held it against her chest. She breathed in and out slowly, feeling the kerosene lamp's heat on her face. He had made it. He'd driven to Fairhaven, opened the foundation, added the letter, and resealed the chamber. Then he'd left. And somewhere between Fairhaven and wherever he was going next, his heart had given out. She needed to confirm it. The next morning, she asked Garrett to help her search. He drove her to the county library where they spent 2 hours on the microfilm machine looking through old newspapers. They found it in the Fairhaven Register. October 8th, 2005. A short article in the local section. An unidentified man was found deceased in his vehicle on Route 11, approximately 40 miles west of Fairhaven. The county coroner determined the cause of death to be cardiac arrest. The vehicle, a 1991 Ford pickup registered to an Elliot R. Halstead of Springfield, Missouri, contained personal effects and road maps. No next of kin has been located. The remains were processed by the county medical examiner's office. 40 miles. He'd been 40 miles from the town he'd built the water system for, 40 miles from the tower, 40 miles from the chamber, where he'd just sealed his last letter to a granddaughter he'd never met. Garrett put his hand on Rowan's shoulder and left it there. He was coming home, Rowan said. He made it far enough, Garrett said quietly. He sealed that letter. He left you everything he had. He made it far enough for that. They sat in the library for a while. The microfilm machine hummed. Dust floated in the light from the window. I want to build something on that land, Rowan said. A workshop. A place where people can come and fix things. Learn to build. Use their hands. She looked at Garrett. Elliot built the water system to give the town something it needed. I want to do the same thing. Garrett nodded. I think that's exactly right. The county board hearing was held on a Tuesday morning in the courthouse meeting room. Rowan arrived early, wearing the cleanest clothes she owned, carrying a folder with copies of Elliot's journal, the photographs, the bond receipts, and the property deed. Marcus Brennan sat on the other side of the room with his lawyer, a man in a gray suit who carried a leather briefcase. Marcus wore a sport coat and no tie. He didn't look at Rowan. The 5 board members filed in and took their seats behind a long table. The chairman, a woman named Dr. Patricia Webb, called the meeting to order and read the formal complaint. Brennan's lawyer spoke first. He laid out the argument about the commercial overlay, the master plan, the improper surplus listing. He was smooth and organized and used words that sounded reasonable even when they weren't. He talked for 15 minutes. Then it was Rowan's turn. She stood up and walked to the front of the room. She'd never spoken in front of a group before. Her hands were shaking, so she held them flat on the podium. My name is Rowan Halstead, she said. I'm 20 years old. I bought Lot 14 at the county surplus auction for $5 because I was homeless and I needed somewhere to sleep. She paused. The room was quiet. After I bought it, I found a sealed chamber in the foundation of the water tower. Inside was a journal written by my grandfather, Elliot Halstead, who built that tower in 1957. He was the water commissioner of this town. He designed the system that gives you your water. She opened the folder and held up the photograph of Elliot standing in front of the half-built tower. This is him, Elliot Halstead. He was driven out of Fairhaven in 1961 after a man named Theodore Brennan pressured the town council to remove him so he could control the water rights. She looked at Marcus. Theodore Brennan was your grandfather. Marcus's jaw tightened. His lawyer shifted in his seat. Elliot sealed his journal, his photographs, and his life savings into the foundation before he left. He spent 40 years trying to come back. He died on Route 11, 40 miles from this courthouse, driving home. She set down the photograph and picked up the letter. He left a letter to whoever found the chamber. He said, "Build something. Stay." That's what I'm doing. I'm not a developer. I don't have a commercial plan or a master plan or a lawyer with a briefcase. I have a cleared foundation, a half-built house, and a grandfather who wanted someone to care about this piece of land as much as he did. She stepped back from the podium. That's all I have to say. The chairman asked if anyone else wished to speak. Lloyd Sawyer stood up. I've been helping Rowan build for the past month. She works harder than anyone I've seen in 40 years of carpentry. She's building something real. The town needs more of that, not less. Garrett stood up. My uncle knew Elliot Halstead. Said he was the most honest man in Fairhaven. His granddaughter is the same. I've watched her clear rubble by hand sleep on the ground and refuse to quit. This town has owed the Halstead family an apology for 60 years. The least we can do is let his granddaughter keep the land. A man Rowan didn't recognize stood up. I'm Dave Perkins. I ran the water line to her property. She didn't ask me to speak here today, but I wanted to. My house has water because Elliot Halstead built the system. His granddaughter deserves that lot. 3 more people stood. The woman from the church, the diner owner, Hank from the lumber yard. Each one said something different, but the message was the same. Rowan belonged here. The land was hers. The board deliberated for 12 minutes. Dr. Webb returned to the microphone. The board has reviewed the complaint filed by Brennan Development regarding the surplus auction of Lot 14. We find that the sale was conducted in accordance with county procedures and that no procedural error occurred. The complaint is denied. The sale stands. She looked at Rowan. The property is yours, Miss Halstead. Congratulations. Rowan thanked the board and walked out of the courthouse on legs that didn't feel entirely solid. Garrett was waiting on the steps. Lloyd was beside him. Duke, who had been tied to a bench outside, pulled at his leash and barked once when he saw her. Well, Garrett asked. It's mine, Rowan said. Garrett hugged her. It was quick and firm and exactly enough. Lloyd shook her hand. Let's get back to work. 6 months later, on the first warm Saturday of April, Rowan stood in the doorway of her house and watched the workshop fill up. The house was small, 12 by 20 feet. One room with a sleeping loft above the kitchen area. A wood stove against the north wall. A bathroom Lloyd had plumbed himself over a weekend that nearly killed him. The floor was plywood that Rowan planned to cover with hardwood when she could afford it. The walls were insulated and drywalled. The roof didn't leak. It was the first home she'd had since Vera's apartment. She built most of it with her own hands. And every time she set her palm against the doorframe, she felt the grain of the wood she'd cut, sanded and fitted. Duke lay on his bed beside the stove, head up, ears tracking the noise outside. The workshop sat where the collapsed water tower had been. Rowan and Lloyd had built it over the winter using the foundation as the floor and reclaimed steel from the tower's wreckage for the structural frame. The roof was corrugated metal. The sides were open on 3 faces with roll-down canvas panels for bad weather. A long workbench ran the length of the south wall, and tools hung from a pegboard that Garrett had donated from his store. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. Lloyd was already out there setting up sawhorses for his Saturday carpentry class. He'd been teaching it since January, and it had grown from 2 people to 11. Today, a father and his teenage son were building a bookshelf. 2 women from the church quilting group were learning to use a table saw. A man Rowan knew only as Ruiz was restoring an antique rocking chair he'd found at a yard sale. Morning Lloyd called when he saw Rowan. "Coffee's on." He'd installed a coffee maker on the workbench in February. It sat between a belt sander and a jar of wood screws. Everyone who came to the workshop knew where it was. Rowan poured a cup and stood at the edge of the foundation, watching people work. The April sun was warm on her face. Wildflowers had pushed up through the gravel along the fence line, yellow and purple, claiming the ground the weeds had held for years. She was 21 now. In the fall, she'd start online classes in structural engineering through the State University's extension program. She'd chosen the field because of Elliot, because she'd read his journal entries about pipe layouts and pump pressures and the satisfaction of designing a system that gave a whole town clean water. And she'd recognized the same feeling she got when she sank a nail clean on the first swing. She worked part-time at Garrett's hardware store 4 days a week. Garrett paid her $10 an hour plus lunch, which Garrett always insisted on making himself. Sandwiches and fruit and a thermos of soup that he claimed was leftovers, but Rowan suspected he cooked fresh every morning. "You're too thin," Garrett said every time Rowan protested. "I'm the same weight I was last month. Too thin last month, too." It had become a routine. Rowan would walk to the store at 7, open up, stock shelves, help customers until 2. Then she'd walk back to the lot and work on whatever project needed attention. The workshop, the house, the small garden she'd started behind the east fence where she was growing tomatoes and beans. Because Vera had always kept a window box of herbs, and Rowan wanted to see if she'd inherited any of that instinct. She had. The tomatoes were already 3 inches tall. On a Tuesday in late April, Rowan was at the workshop sharpening chisels when she heard footsteps on the gravel. She looked up and saw a girl standing at the gate. 17 maybe. Thin. A garbage bag of clothes in one hand. She wore a hoodie that was too big for her and sneakers with the soles separating from the uppers. Rowan set down the chisel. The girl didn't come in. She stood at the gate looking at the workshop and the house and the dog and Rowan, evaluating the situation the way people evaluate situations. when they've learned that new places are usually worse than the last one. "Can I help you?" Rowan asked. "I saw the sign on the highway," the girl said. "Community workshop. Free tools and classes." Rowan had put the sign up 2 weeks ago, hand-painted on a piece of plywood. Garrett had told her it looked like a child had made it, and Rowan had said, "Good. Children need workshops too." "That's us," Rowan said. "Come in." The girl hesitated. Then she walked through the gate, garbage bag bumping against her leg. Duke lifted his head, studied her, and put it back down. That was as close to approval as Duke gave strangers. "I'm Rowan. Josie." "You hungry, Josie? I've got peanut butter sandwiches and some of Garrett's soup." "Who's Garrett?" "He owns the hardware store in town. He makes soup like it's his job, which it isn't. His job is selling nails." A smile flickered across Josie's face. Small, uncertain, but real. They sat at the workbench and ate. Josie ate fast, the way people eat when they're not sure when the next meal is coming. Rowan recognized it because she'd eaten that way for 2 years. She didn't ask Josie questions. She learned from her own experience that the worst thing someone could do when you were scared and hungry was interrogate you. So she talked about the workshop instead. What they built there. Who came. How Lloyd had accidentally glued his hand to a sawhorse last month, and they'd had to call Garrett for acetone. Josie laughed at that. A real laugh, short but genuine. After lunch, Rowan showed her how to use a hand plane. Josie picked it up quickly, taking long, even strokes along a piece of pine, curling thin ribbons of wood off the surface. "You've done this before," Rowan said. "My foster dad in the last place had a garage," Josie said, not looking up. "He taught me some stuff before they moved me." "Why'd they move you?" Josie shrugged. "Budget cuts, the home closed. I got transferred twice, then I aged out 3 weeks ago. Where have you been sleeping?" "Bus station in Greenville. Then a church that lets people stay in the basement. Then I started walking." Rowan watched her work the hand plane. Steady hands, focused eyes. A girl who'd learned to be good at things because being good at things was sometimes the only control you had. "I have a spare room," Rowan said. Josie looked up. "It's small. Just a bed and a dresser. But the stove keeps the whole house warm, and there's hot water." Josie stared at her. "You don't even know me. I know you walked here with a garbage bag. I know you're hungry. I know you can use a hand plane better than half the people who come to this workshop." Rowan met her eyes. "I was where you are 2 years ago, sleeping in a car, eating gas station sandwiches, no plan, no family, no address. Someone let me stay. I'm doing the same thing." Josie didn't say anything for a long time. She looked at the workshop, the house, the garden, Duke dozing in the sun. "For how long?" she asked. "For as long as you need." "What if I mess it up? Then we'll fix it. That's what workshops are for." Josie moved in that afternoon. Rowan gave her the spare room. A set of clean sheets, a towel. She showed her where the food was and told her the bathroom was hers whenever she wanted it. That night, Rowan heard the shower running for 45 minutes. She didn't say a word about it. She remembered what it felt like to have unlimited hot water after months without it. You stood there until the feeling sank in. Over the next 2 weeks, Josie settled. She helped at the workshop, organized tools, swept the floor, assisted Lloyd during his Saturday classes. Garrett brought extra food when he came by, always with a plausible excuse. Josie accepted it all without comment, and Rowan noticed her eating more slowly as the days passed, less desperate, more present. One afternoon, Rowan drove Josie to the high school in town to talk about enrollment. Josie sat in the car, staring at the building. "I haven't been in a school in 2 years," she said. "I hadn't been in one in 6 when I started studying for my classes," Rowan said. "You don't have to figure it all out today. Just show up tomorrow." Josie looked at her. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Rowan thought about that. She thought about Elliot's letter, about Vera's sewing kit, about Garrett's gloves and Lloyd's toolbox, and the plumber who ran a water line for free. "Because somebody cared what happened to me," she said. "And the only way to pay that back is forward." Josie enrolled the next day. On a Saturday in May, Rowan looked up from the workbench and saw Marcus Brennan walking through the gate. He had a girl with him, maybe 8 or 9, with dark braids and a serious expression. Rowan tensed. Duke stood up from where he'd been resting and moved to her side, watching. "This is my daughter, Emma," Marcus said. "She wants to build a birdhouse." Rowan looked at him. He looked different than he had at the hearing. His shoulders were lower. His voice was quieter. He held his daughter's hand, and the grip was gentle. "Lloyd teaches the Saturday class," Rowan said. "He's got birdhouse kits. 3rd workbench on the left." Marcus nodded. "Thank you." He walked Emma to Lloyd's station, and Lloyd handed her a piece of pre-cut pine and a small hammer without comment. Marcus stood nearby watching his daughter tap nails into wood. And for a moment he looked like any other father at the workshop, just a man watching his kid learn something new. He didn't mention the lawsuit, didn't mention the land or the auction or the Brennan name. He didn't need to. He was standing in a workshop built on ground his grandfather had stolen from Rowan's grandfather, watching his daughter learn from the carpenter who had helped Rowan rebuild it. Before he left, he stopped by Rowan's workbench. Emma was carrying a lopsided birdhouse with visible pride. "She had a good time," he said, nodding toward Emma. "She's welcome back anytime." Marcus paused. Something passed across his face. Something Rowan recognized as the particular discomfort of a person who wants to say something honest and doesn't know how. "I'm sorry," he said. "About the hearing. About all of it." "I know," Rowan said. He left. The next morning, Rowan woke to the sound of a truck engine. She pulled on her boots and stepped outside. A flatbed delivery truck was parked at the gate. 2 men were unloading stacks of fresh-cut lumber, setting them neatly along the fence line. Good lumber, straight and dry. better quality than anything Rowan had bought. "Who sent this?" she called out. The driver looked at his clipboard. Delivery order paid in full. No name on the slip. He handed her the receipt. The order was for 24 sheets of plywood 4x6s and a pallet of roofing materials. Enough to finish her house and start on something larger. The driver climbed back into the cab and pulled away. As the truck turned onto Tower Road, Rowan caught a glimpse of the logo on the tailgate. Brennan Development. She stood at the gate holding the receipt, looking at the lumber. Duke sat beside her, tail sweeping the ground. That evening, Marcus Brennan sat alone in his truck on a hilltop overlooking Fairhaven. He'd driven up here after dropping Emma at her mother's house. The sun was setting behind him, painting the valley in shades of amber and rust. From this distance, he could see the whole town. Main Street with its 4 blocks, the courthouse, the grain elevator, and at the eastern edge, just visible through the trees, the workshop on Tower Road. Lights on inside. Someone working late. Marcus thought about his father, about the day his father had driven him out to this same hilltop when Marcus was 16 and showed him the Brennan legacy, the farmland his grandfather Theodore had bought, the developments his father had built, the empire that had started with one man's deals in the 1950s. His father had been proud of it, had told Marcus it was all his someday. Every acre, every building, every deal. Marcus had always known it was dirty. His grandfather's reputation had been an open secret in Fairhaven. Theodore Brennan got what Theodore Brennan wanted, and he didn't much care how. But Marcus had never said it out loud. He'd taken the company, expanded it, built on the foundation his grandfather had laid. Until Rowan Halstead walked into that county board meeting and held up a photograph of the man his grandfather had destroyed. Marcus had gone home that night and pulled out the old files, the meeting minutes from 1961, the newspaper articles about Elliot Halstead's sudden departure, the audit that found nothing wrong but somehow still ended a man's career. It was all there, written in dry, bureaucratic language. But the story was clear. Theodore Brennan had wanted control of the water rights. Elliot Halstead had stood in his way. So Theodore had used the council to remove him. Legal, but not right. Marcus looked at the birdhouse on his passenger seat, the one Emma had built that morning, lopsided and proud. She'd talked about it the whole drive home, about the nice lady who ran the workshop, about the old man who taught her how to hold the hammer, about the dog who let her pet him. Marcus didn't know how to undo what his grandfather had done. He couldn't bring Elliot back, couldn't give him the career he'd lost or the years he'd spent in Missouri working maintenance jobs beneath his skill. But he could make sure Elliot's granddaughter had the materials she needed to build something that lasted. It wasn't redemption, not yet. But it was a start. He started the truck and drove back down the hill toward town. Rowan spent the rest of that week working on the house. She used the lumber from the anonymous delivery to frame an addition, a small room on the east side, 8 by 10. Just big enough for a desk and a bookshelf and a window that looked out at the garden. Lloyd came by to help. So did Garrett. They didn't ask where the lumber came from. They just showed up with tools and worked alongside her. Josie helped too, measuring, cutting, learning. She was getting better every day. Her cuts were cleaner, her corners tighter. She asked questions about load-bearing walls and joist spacing. Real questions. The kind that came from someone who wanted to understand, not just follow instructions. One evening, Rowan and Josie sat on the porch steps after a long day of framing. Duke lay between them. The April air had cooled and the first fireflies were starting to blink in the tall grass beyond the fence. "I talked to the counselor at school today," Josie said. "About colleges." Rowan looked at her. "Yeah," she said, "there are programs for foster kids, scholarships, support services." She gave me a list of schools with good carpentry programs. Josie picked at a splinter on the step. "I told her I didn't know if I was smart enough for college." What did she say? She said I was already building things most college students can't build. So maybe I should stop worrying about being smart enough and start worrying about which school has the best workshop. Rowan smiled. Sounds like a smart counselor. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fireflies, Duke's breathing slow and steady between them. "Thank you," Josie said quietly, "for letting me stay." Rowan thought about Elliot's letter, about the line that had stuck with her most. "If you're reading this, you found your way home. You don't have to thank me," Rowan said. "You would have done the same thing." Josie looked at her. "How do you know?" "Because you're here. Because you walked 40 miles with a garbage bag instead of giving up. Because when I handed you a hand plane, you didn't just use it, you learned it." She nudged Josie's shoulder. "People who do that, they help other people do it too. You'll see." On a Sunday in late May, Garrett and Lloyd came for dinner as usual. Emma came with them. She'd asked Marcus if she could come back to the workshop, and Marcus had called Garrett to ask if it was all right. Garrett had said yes, then invited Emma to Sunday dinner. Rowan didn't mind. They ate at the table Rowan had built. Josie helped serve. Duke lay under the table collecting scraps from Emma, who didn't know the rules about not feeding the dog, and didn't care. "I burned the chicken," Garrett announced, setting the pan down. "It's perfect," Emma said, taking a bite. "See." Garrett looked at Lloyd. "The child has taste. The child has low standards," Lloyd said. They argued about poultry, and Rowan watched and felt the room fill with something she'd been chasing her whole life, without knowing it. The sound of people who chose to be together, who came back, who stayed. After dinner, Emma asked if she could see the garden. Josie took her outside, and Rowan watched through the window as Josie showed Emma the tomato plants and let her water them with a watering can Rowan had made from a milk jug. "She's good with her," Lloyd said, standing beside Rowan. "Yeah, she is. You did that. You gave her a place to figure out who she is." Rowan shook her head. "I just gave her a room. She did the rest. Lloyd looked at her with the expression he got when he was about to say something important. Elliot would be proud of you. You know that, right? Rowan's throat went tight. I hope so. I know so. You took what he left, and you built something better. That's what legacy is. Not just what you leave behind, but what the next person does with it. That night, after everyone had gone home and Josie had gone to bed, and the house was quiet except for Duke's breathing, Rowan sat at her new desk in the new room. The window was open and the night air smelled like cut grass and distant rain. She pulled out a piece of paper and started writing. Not to anyone in particular. Just writing. The way Elliot had written in his journal. Trying to make sense of things by putting them into words. She wrote about the day she bought the lot for $5. About finding Duke. About Garrett's gloves and Lloyd's toolbox. About the chamber and the journal. And the bonds and the letter that had waited 60 years to be found. She wrote about the hearing and the workshop and Josie showing up at the gate with a garbage bag. She wrote about Marcus sending lumber without a name on the slip. About Emma learning to build a birdhouse. About the way things could break and be rebuilt. Not the same, but maybe better. When she finished, she folded the paper and put it in Vera's sewing tin, next to the photograph of Vera and the thimble and the measuring tape. Another piece of the story. Another thread connecting what was to what would be. She closed the tin and looked out the window. The workshop stood quiet in the dark, waiting for morning. Waiting for people to come and learn and build and fix things. Rowan picked up Elliot's journal one more time and opened it to the page where she'd written her name beside his. Elliot Halstead, Water Commissioner, Fairhaven, April 1955. Rowan Halstead, Workshop, Fairhaven, April 2018. She added one more line beneath it. Small letters, just for herself. Home isn't where you're born, it's where you stop running. She closed the journal and set it on the desk where she could see it every day. Outside, the stars were coming out. The same stars that had been there the night she arrived. The night she'd slept on hard ground with nothing but a tarp and a dog she'd just met. The night she'd been so afraid and so tired and so certain she was at the end of something. She'd been wrong. She'd been at the beginning. Through the wall, she could hear Josie breathing in her sleep. Steady. Safe. Home. Duke sighed and settled at her feet. And Rowan Halstead, 21 years old, sat at her desk in the house she'd built on the land her grandfather had loved. In the town that had finally welcomed a Halstead back, and knew with absolute certainty that she had found the place she was meant to be. Not because it was where she was born, but because it was where she had chosen to stay. And in choosing to stay, she had built something that would outlast her. Something that would give the next person who needed it a place to learn and grow and become whoever they were meant to be. Just like Elliot had done for her. The tower was gone. But what it had held, what Elliot had sealed into its foundation with his own hands, had survived, had grown, had become something new, And that Rowan thought looking out at the workshop in the starlight was what legacy really meant. Not what you built, but what others built because you did.